guys, welcome back to Under the Moon Paranormal Ohio Legends, where Ohio history meets haunted legends in one podcast. So, before we start anything on the show, just a quick announcement. If you would like to support the show, then there's a few ways you could do that. You could subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is Under the Moon Paranormal on YouTube, or you can follow us on Spotify or any other platforms that have this show. Also, rating the show and sharing it with a friend goes a long way. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for supporting the show and thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed last month's episode, which was about Grassman. So before we get into the spooky stuff, let's talk about the full moon. All right. Sagittarius energy is beloved for its uplifting, enlightening, and lucky effects, offering new glimmers of hope when it swirls through the skies. Speaking of swirling through the skies, did you all catch the northern lights in Ohio? Man, that was a sight to see. Anyway, with the full moon rising in the sun of the Archer on the morning of May 23rd, 2024, we'll all have a chance to bask in this sparkling vibes. This lunar event could lead to exciting new breakthroughs, unexpected blessings, and new philosophical discussions. Lean into these vibes by choosing to focus on brighter spots of your life, understanding that the expansive nature on this cosmic climate will bring growth where you invest the most time, money, and energy. Pluto, the planet of empowerment and transformation, also plays a role in this astrological event, forming supportive aspects in the sun and the moon. If you struggled with loss recently, the energy at play suggests new joys are on the way. Embrace change as a part of your full moon journey, especially when cycling through your social sphere or community building. We'll all be reminded of how important it is to connect with the cultivate harmony, making it a good time to go where you feel seen and supported. If you've been struggling to find your place in society, use this energy to explore local events or volunteer opportunities, and you'll soon find a comfortable space that you can truly thrive in. Lingering on the sidelines of Luna's glow comes a dreamy connection between Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune, making it easier to forgive and find commonality. If you've been struggling with certain dynamics, now would be a great time to clear the air and move forward. Matters of the heart also benefit from this celestial exchange, bringing forth an internal landscape that is ideal for flirting, romantic dates, or shamelessly disappearing into self-love through self-care, which is where I'll be going. Go where you feel the most elated, sidestepping any drama or stress you need to break from. With Jupiter as the planetary ruler of this moon, there will be much to feel hopeful about. Now is the time to find balance between spirituality, faith, and taking a leap, pursuing opportunity as luck waits to strike. Remember that when future offers important opportunities to learn, and trust that taking a chance will serve you regardless of your final outcome. On the plus side, the universe will be in particularly good spirits, making it easier to win favor with the cosmos and the people you encounter. If you find yourself dealing with upheaval or disappointment, consider looking for a new path to travel. A karmatic element also comes into play, asking you to be generous with your energetic, financial, and emotional resources. Just try not to overextend yourself, especially when it comes to those who might take advantage of you. You'll feel energized and limitless, but giving all your focus away to other people could lead to a burnout. Consider what you can grow to cultivate more happiness for yourself, regardless of these dreams or hyper-complex or shockingly simple things to manifest. Everything will feel magnified under the stars, but staying grounded can help you avoid feeling overwhelmed. So, sounds like a very exciting full moon, doesn't it? All right, so If you have a spooky story that you would like to share on this podcast, or if you have a topic that you want to send me that you want me to cover, please email me at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com. All right, now on to this month's interesting topic. We are talking about Athens, Ohio. So first we're going to do a little bit of history lesson, and then we're going to get into like why it's haunted. There's some theories I have of why it's haunted. But first, history. The Athens Lunatic Asylum, now a mixed use of development known as the Ridges, was a Kirkbride planned mental hospital operated in Athens, Ohio, from 1874 until 1993. During its operation, the hospital provided services to a variety of patients, including Civil War veterans, children, and those declared mentally unwell. After a period of disuse, the property was redeveloped by the state of Ohio. Today, the Ridges are a part of the Ohio University and house the Kennedy Museum of Art as well as an auditorium, many offices, classrooms, and storage facilities. The former hospital is perhaps best known as the site of the infamous lobotomy procedure, as well as various supposed paranormal sightings. After the hospital's original structure closed, the state of Ohio acquired the property and renamed the complex and its surroundings the Ridges. According to the Guide of the Respiratory Holdings, the term the Ridges was derived from from a naming contest in 1984 to re-describe the area and its purpose. Now, just to be clear, even though the mental hospital, this asylum, closed in 1993, the patients were just moved to a different facility that's right down the road, which is like now called like the Appalachian mental health facility. And those patients that were there in 1993, most of them are still there at this other place, which is not that far away from this building. Okay, with that being said, moving on. The architect for the original building was Levi T. Schofield of Cleveland. The hospital grounds were designed by Herman Halerlin of Cincinnati. Some of Halerlin's other landscape designs are seen in Cincinnati's Spring Grove Cemetery and the oval on the campus of The Ohio University in Columbus. The design of the buildings and grounds were influenced by Thomas Story Kirkbride, a 19th century physician who authored an influential treatise on the hospital design called On the Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane. Kirkbride plan asylums are most recognizably characteristic by the staggering batwing floor type plan in their wards, high Victorian Gothic architecture, and their sprawling grounds. In accordance with the Kirkbride plan, the main building was to include a central administration building with a wing for men on one side and a wing for women on the other, each with their own separate dining halls. There was a room to house 572 patients in the main building, almost double Kirkbride's recommendation. The building itself was 853 feet long and 60 feet in width. Operating years. From 1874 to 1993. The Athens Lunatic Asylum began operation on January 9th in 1874. Within 2 years of its opening, the hospital was renamed the Athens Hospital for the Insane. Later, the hospital would be called the Athens Asylum for the Insane. The Athens State Hospital, the Southeastern Ohio Mental Health Center, the Athens Mental Health Center, and then the Athens Mental Health and Mental Retardation Center, and then it was called the Athens Mental Health and Developmental Center, and then again it was switched to Athens Mental Health Center. It had a lot of really fucked up names. The original hospital was in operation from 1874 to 1993. Although not wholly self-sustaining facility, many Kirkbride plan asylums functioned as cloistered communities And for decades, the hospital had livestock, farm fields, gardens, an orchard, a greenhouse, a dairy, and a physical plant to germinate steam heat, and even a carriage shop. A large percentage of the work took to maintain the facility was originally carried out by the patients. Labor, especially skilled labor, was seen by the Kirkbride plan as a form of therapy and was economically adventurous for the state. So they benefited from paying these mentally unwell people for labor. The asylum expanded to include specialized and ancillary buildings such as the Dairy Barn, which is now an arts center, a beacon school, Athens Receiving Hospital, Center Hospital, and the tubercular ward, Cottage B. Also built onto the main building were a laundry room and a boiler room. 7 cottages, including Cottage B, were constructed to house even more patients. While they had smaller capacity than the main wards, they allowed for constructive grouping of patients like a dormitory type room, which is why they used it as a university later. By the 1950s, the hospital was the town's largest employer, with 1,800 patients on a 1,019-acre, 78-building campus. At its peak, the Athens Lunatic Asylum served Adams, Athens, Gala, Highland, Hocking, Jackson, Lawrence, Meigs, Morgan, Perry, Pike, Ross, Scioto, Vinton, and Washington counties. Decline and closure. The mental health industry in the United States underwent a sea change in the 1950s. Research began to show that the mentally ill did not pose an inherent danger to their communities. So instead of, doing electroshock therapy and lobotomy, they switched to, the psychoactive drugs that helped them go back home. The public became increasingly aware of the procedures like electroshock therapy and lobotomy, which would come to be seen as cruel, unnecessary, and inhumane. The availability of the psychoactive drugs for the treatment of the mental illnesses, as well as the increasing prevalence of psychological therapy, allowed for most patients to be treated without the need for internment for a prison-like situation. The asylum, among many others like them, declined throughout the later half of the 20th century and eventually closed in 1993. They also did away with the labor laws. They couldn't make them work in the barns and in the gardens anymore, so it eventually closed because of that as well. However, the state hospital continued to function in Athens, with some patients and staff relocating. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of modern day history and present day history before we get into all the weird stuff. By the early 1990s, many of the original buildings had fallen into despair. Following a similar pattern of decline and neglect among the Kirkbride plan asylums, as the mental health care industry transitioned away from large centralized institutions, the will to support sprawling hospital complexes diminished. Large asylums were slowly phased out, with most operations shifting to small outpatient centers scattered throughout the community. Because asylums were typically located on a hill outside of the nearest municipal center, their degradation was able to occur out of sight and out of hand and out of mind. Under private ownership, abandoned Kirkbrides often languished, unmaintained, unsecured, slowly being reclaimed by nature. And since abandoning structures present serious insurance liabilities, there is an incentive for the property owner to secure them. The abandoned property owned by the colleges and universities may be especially easy targeted for urban exploration, squatting, vandalism, or student body or general public, or people like me, ghost adventurers people. In 1993, the Athens Lunatic Asylum property was deeded over to the Ohio University. In a land swap with the state's Department of Mental Health, under the ownership of Ohio University, the property was kept relatively good shape and maintained. In 2000 and 2010s, The urban exploration and modern ruins occupying a growing niche of public consciousness through the entertainment and media, Kirkbride plan asylums have enjoyed renewed public attention in the 2000s and 2010s. Two historically significant Kirkbrides, the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts and the Hudson River Hospital in New York, fell into dangerous disrepair in the 1990s and the 2000s and eventually went under partial demolition to make way for new development. At Athens, the owners of a stable funding authority, Ohio University that is, has ensured restoration of much of the original grounds, as envisioned by original planners in a mixed-use university development called The Ridges. Most buildings have been renovated and turned into classrooms and office buildings. The administration building is now home of the Kennedy Art Museum, showcasing paintings and artworks of all different types of artists. The Dairy Barn, Southeastern Ohio Cultural Arts Center, a nonprofit art organization, is located in the old hospital's remodeled Dairy Barn. It is privately owned and operated. The Dairy Barn operates a calendar for sculpting and exhibits. The George School of Leadership and Public Affairs is also located at the Ridges. It is in a set of 3 separate buildings across the area. The old tuberculosis ward, Cottage B, which sat on a hill separated from the other buildings, was demolished by the Ohio University in 2013 due to a large number of college students exploring the dangerous structure. Cottage B was designed in the early 1900s, fireproofing standards and incorporated copious asbestos linings inside the walls, making it difficult to, renovate. Members of the Athens, Ohio chapter, NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, have worked to restore the 3 graveyards located at the grounds of the Ridges. School organizations provide tours of the facility around Halloween every year. To preserve is also regularly used by the school's Army Battalion. All right, so now we're going to get into some of the more weird stuff, okay? So that was the history of Athens Lunatic Asylum, which is now called the Ridges. The first patient of the asylum was a 14-year-old girl with epilepsy, thought to be possessed by a demon. Epilepsy was considered a major cause of insanity and for reason for admission to the hospital in the earliest years. The first annual report lists 31 men and 19 women as having their insanity caused by epilepsy. General ill health accounted for admission of 39 men and 44 women in the first 3 years of the hospital's operation. Ailments such as menopause, alcohol addiction, and tuberculosis were a cause for enrollment into the hospital. For the female patients hospitalized during these first 3 years of the asylum's operation, the 3 leading causes of insanity are recorded as perpetual condition, 51 women, which is the change of life, menopause, 32 women for menstrual derangements, 29 women with postpartum depression, or they labeled it as hysteria, were labeled insane and sent to recover in this institution. Women were often institutionalized for unnecessary or outright reasons. The second most common cause of insanity, as recorded in the first annual report, was intemperance or dissipation. In the hospital's first 3 years of operation, according to the annual report of 1876, 81 men and 1 woman were diagnosed as having their insanity caused by masturbation. 56 men and 1 woman were designed as having their insanity caused by intemperance or dissipation during that same time period. Recordings from the asylum document some of the now discredited theories of the causes of mental illness, such as the practice of harmful treatments, such as lobotomy. The Ohio University Archives collection information regarding employees' background training, which ranged from full training and qualification to a complete lack thereof. Most disturbing in the documentation is the hydrotherapy, electroshock, lobotomy, and early psychotropic drugs. Many of which of these have been discredited today as extremely inhumane ways of treating patients. No shit. They still have a long way to go in mental health facilities, but they're getting better. Not great, but they're getting better. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 5 cemeteries. Yeah, there are 5 cemeteries that surround the Ohio University, or the Ridges, and we're going to talk about them right here, right now. All right, here we go. Myth and mysteries surround a well-known site in southern Ohio, the Athens Lunatic Asylum. The mystery is fueled perhaps because the public cannot access a majority of the information about patients who were treated and lived at the asylum. With special permission and filling out paperwork that is required by the state of Ohio, some of the information can be accessed. However, those interested in finding out about the patients that walk through the doors of the asylum can satisfy their curiosity by looking into the cemeteries. There are 1,930 people buried at 3 cemeteries located at the Ridges. Of those, 700 women, 959 men lay under headstones marked only by a number. There were some patients who had died that were reunited with their families and buried in cemeteries around their homes. By 1943, the state of Ohio began putting names and births and deaths on markers of the patients who died. It is unknown as to why the state switched from using only numbers to using the names in order to verify who the deceased were, but this practice remained consistent throughout the remainder of the time of the patients that were buried at the asylum. Although the newer stones had names, births, and deaths, the older ones had not been replaced until recently. By 1980, the state no longer took care of the cemeteries, which made it easy for outsider vandalizers to vandalize them. Natural occurrences also caused damage. The stones marking where patients were buried were in desperate need of repair. They were left to the elements, and hundreds of stones left uprooted and broken. Beginning in the 2000s, the Athens, Ohio chapter of National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, started reclamation for the cemeteries, taking on the work that was once the responsibility of the Ohio Department of Mental Health. NAMI, Athens worked to help restore the cemeteries at the asylum to its original state. The organization got involved with other groups and organizations in a major effort to restore, beautify, and demystify the 3 mental health graveyards located on the grounds of the old psychiatric hospital complex on the Ridges. Since there is the time of the opening of the cemeteries in the state of Ohio has allowed families to erect private markers at graves of their loved ones. There are very few graves marked in such a way, most likely because descendants are unaware of the opportunity. Since the takeover, more information has been found out about the patients that are buried in these 3 cemeteries. A large portion of the information that has been recovered is about the veterans that have spent the remaining days of their lives at the asylum. Many of these veterans did not receive honors and only 19 have had any recognition. There are 80 veterans that are buried at the Ridges. Of these veterans, 2 fought in the Mexican War, 68 fought in the Civil War, and 1 was a member of the Confederate Army, and another 2 veterans served in the United States Colored Infantry. There are 3 veterans who served in the Spanish-American War, and 7 fought in World War I. Some of the other veterans that are buried here were active duty in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century. NAMI has also done things to honor those who have served our country as well as other patients who are buried in the cemeteries at the Ridges. Besides helping replace gravestones and keeping the grounds in proper condition, in 2005 the Ridges Committee had been organizing Memorial Day ceremonies for many veterans buried at the asylum. Prior to 2005, the veterans have never received such honors. Indeed, neither they nor the others of the cemeteries had received any more than a burial, no personalized service whatsoever. NAMI started the Memorial Day ceremonies to help restore dignity to the patients on the ridges and help reorganize the sacrifice for the veterans, many who had probably suffered through the most traumatic stress disorder and as well as other war symptoms. To find these lost veterans, they were found through a special search within a broader research project to find background information over the 1,900 patients buried in the asylum's 3 cemeteries. With the help of the Athens County Veterans Service Office, a special appropriation from the Athens County Commissioner's flag stands, and flags have been placed at these graves of all the veterans in all 3 cemeteries. So that's a little bit about the 3 cemeteries. So now we're going to find out why Athens was haunted. So we're going to talk about the buildings themselves just a little bit, just a quick list of what's going on at the Ridges. Okay, it used to be known as the Athens Lunatic Asylum and now is known as the Ridges, which is a neighbor to the Ohio University. Okay, so it still holds shadows, stains, and spirits of formerly mental patients who often suffered from violent treatments such as lobotomies. The ground of the former asylum are still home to a few unusual and extremely eerie cemeteries. Patients of former insane asylums were buried on the facility's grounds, and their restless spirits were left to wander the property. Most of the graves are buried without names and merely displayed a number for the former mental patient buried beneath. So, the Ridges, the building itself. We have the West Green Ohio University, which is where these 5 pentagrams, this is what's in the middle of them, is the West Green Hall. Okay? And why is the West Green Hall haunted? Well, it's said to be haunted because allegedly it's built on top of an ancient Indian burial ground. Yeah. So then you have Wilson Hall, located on West Green, that is arguably the most haunted dormitory in the Ohio's University's campus. In addition of being built atop of an Indian burial ground, the hall is said to be built on top of an old cemetery. And sitting at the center of the pentagram formed by several cemeteries in the Athens region. Most of the hauntings in Wilson Hall are centered around the 4th floor. Students on this floor have reported seeing apparitions, hearing voices, and slamming doors. It is also rumored that a student unalived himself in a room on the 4th floor. This particular room was featured years ago in an episode of Scariest Places on Earth. Y'all remember that show? I remember that show. Convocation Center. Also located on the West Green part of the campus, the Convo is said to be haunted by several ghosts in the dormitory position of the building. Some of the stories include the ghost of an RA who was supposedly unalived by her boyfriend and now roams the halls at night, and the ghost of a student who died while sleeping that embraces students sleeping at night. He still likes to cuddle, is what I've heard, that he still likes to cuddle. Washington Hall. Located on the East Green portion of the Ohio University's campus, this dormitory is allegedly haunted by the entire basketball team of high school girls who visited the university right before they were killed in a bus accident. Students have reported hearing several feet running and bouncing basketballs in the distance, and it's one of the most notorious Ohio ghost stories. The cemeteries. Several haunted cemeteries in the Athens area are well known. In fact, there's a rumor that all the haunted cemeteries are placed in the shape of a pentagram with the University Wilson Hall at the center. Supposedly, the haunted cemeteries include Sims Cemetery, Haynes Cemetery, Hanning Cemetery, Chuckler, Higgins, Zion, Hunter, Slaughter, Cutler, Mansfield, and Peach Ridge Cemetery. It's a lot of cemeteries. From haunted Athens University's graveyards and historical buildings, this college town certainly seems to be one of the most haunted places in Ohio. Have you ever had a spooky encounter in Athens? What do you think of these stories? Well, share your thoughts and your own stories with us if you email me at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com. So those were little pinpoints of the hauntings there. Okay. Now let's go back a little bit. Okay. An interesting story that we should talk about here. While many deaths occurred in and around the asylum, a few truly stand out. One tells of a patient named Margaret Schilling, who disappeared on December 1st, 1978, and it wasn't until January the following year that her body was discovered in a long abandoned ward. While her autopsy showed that she died of heart failure, she was found completely naked with her clothing neatly folded next to her body. More interesting in the permanent stain that her body has left behind. Imprinted on the floor, unable to be removed by numerous cleanings, her spirit is said to be seen staring down from the window of the room where her body was found. She's also been attempting to escape and is known to wander the building at night. Rest in peace, sweetheart. Rest in peace. Other former patients are also said to have stayed behind, appearing as full-bodied apparitions standing in the empty wings of the former hospital. Disembodied voices and yells, squeaking gurneys, strange light screams are also a commonplace. Even more frightening are the rumors of the patients that were shackled in the basement for the bad behavior still remain. The hauntings that are reported in the cemeteries are shadow figures running and hiding behind trees, and headstones are reported. In one area, the grave's linear shapes form a circle, which is said to be an old witch's meeting spot. While the truth is mixed in with legend when it comes to the asylum, there is no doubt that many people suffered here at the hands of the abusive staff members and erratic methods of healing. Spirits of those who died and were forgotten are the loudest, banging on windows and the walls of the old asylum, wandering the grounds looking to catch the attention of anyone who comes looking for them. All right, so before we get to a submitted story about Athens from a listener, what caused all these hauntings besides for the abuse of the patients? Like, what's causing the hauntings in all of Athens? Well, let me tell you. The Coons family spirit room is what caused Athens to be so haunted. All right, let me read you a little snippet here. During the heyday of spiritualism, home circles or seances were all the rage among those who were fascinated by the mysterious workings of the spirit world. In these small, close-knit groups of family and friends, members would gather around a dining room table and curious tales about wrappings from somewhere else. Would try to see if they could too receive communications from spirits. Quite often they did. They might hear a soft tap, 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 followed by a louder one, and soon deafening noises could be heard all over the house. Questions would be asked, codes devised, and soon information would be flowing from the other side. In many cases, especially with socially prominent families, such manifestations would be kept private in order to save themselves from ridicule. However, In other cases, when social standings was not a concern, spiritual contacts would widely be publicized and neighbors would be called in for free performances. This sometimes led to members of the home circling become professional mediums, just as it had with the Fox sisters. Another family about whom which is less known was the Coons family, Koons, Coons family from Athens County, Ohio. Though they did not gain much material profit from their venture, the Spirit Room in Athens County became, for a short time in the 1850s, a spiritualist destination that attracted hundreds of believers from all over the country. What was nearly as amazing as the fact that so many people came to Athens County was the ordeal that they had to go through to get there. Although still somewhat remote today, it was virtual wilderness in the 1850s, okay? Very, very rural. It was located in a rough and hilly area not far from Virginia, which is now West Virginia line. To reach it, one had to travel by stagecoach from Columbus over rutted and often washed out roads, and then reach the Coons cabin. Visitors still had to walk another 2 miles along a wooded trail. However, few pilgrims regretted their journey and felt completely rewarded by the manifestations that awaited them. Jonathan Coons, the head of the family, and his wife Abigail had 9 children. I lost my place. Oh. And they were self-educated farmers, but were versed in politics and philosophy of the times. They settled and farmed in the area of Athens County called Mount Nebo, a hill that towers over the town that is now located nearby. Early in 1852, Coons had come across a newspaper descriptions of the Fox family. Sorry. And had once made a personal investigation of growing phenomenon. He attended several seances throughout Ohio and allegedly learned from spirits that he was a gifted medium. When he returned home, he also discovered that Abigail and his oldest son, Nathan, were also endowed with psychic abilities. After holding a number of seances of their own, the Coons were ordered by spirits to build what they dubbed as their spirit room. They were given the exact specifications on how to build it, the size, the furnishings, and the equipment to use. The Coons immediately went to work and, following the spirit's instructions, constructed a log cabin that was 12 by 14 feet and had 3 shuttered windows, a single door, and 7-foot-high ceilings. The room was then furnished with benches that could hold about 20 people. The spirits also requested that they equip the spirit room with a number of musical instruments: a tenor drum, a bass drum, 2 fiddles, a guitar, an accordion, a trumpet, a tin horn, and a tea bell, a triangle, and a tambourine. Coons was not a wealthy man and could not afford all the instruments. Plus, he had trouble finding them in this remote part of Ohio, but managed to order some and borrow the rest from the neighbors. In another seance, the spirits then demanded 2 tables, a rack for the musical instruments, and wire from which to suspend a few small bells, and some images of doves that were cut from sheets of copper. After faithfully following all these instructions, the Coons began giving public seances. Coons, Abigail, and Nahum acted as mediums, and in the darkened cabinet, the spirits began giving lengthy conversations on various spiritual objects, as well as concerts in the musical instruments. Neighbors from all over the region began descending onto the spirit room in Mount Nebo, attracted by not only the rumors about what was taking place, but there was also because the racket made that by the spirits could be heard from a mile in any direction, supposedly. It was not long before visitors from other parts of the county began to arrive as well. Charles Partridge, a well-known New York publisher, later wrote that he found at least 50 people gathered for their first performance that he attended. Many of them were from various parts of Ohio, but there were representatives from other states too. Coons, on the advice of the spirits, gave a preference to those coming far away. There was no admission other than No other charges to attend the seances, but those who stayed the night at the Coons' home usually contributed to something. Throughout this, Coons was still working and maintaining his family farm. He was at times so exhausted that he fell asleep during the seances, so there was little reason to believe that the spirit room was ever a money-making project. While it may not have made money, it certainly attracted attention. Published accounts soon began to appear in journals and spiritualist newspapers from these reports. It became quickly obvious that the seances were not for spectators with fragile nerves. The exhibition was often loud, and the spirits' performances on the musical instruments were nearly ear-shattering. All of the reports, whether choose to believe them or not, agree that the total darkness of a crowded room would have been impossible for the Coons themselves to provide deafening, boisterous entertainment. The program usually followed a set routine. After the audience was seated, the lights were turned out and the door and windows were closed. The start of the seance was usually announced by the banging of the bass drum, which is one witness compared to the firing of a cannon in close quarters. The Coons, who sat at the table with his wife and his son beside him, would start to plait a lively tune on his fiddle. In moments, all the other instruments would join in. Sorry, there is a loud fucking truck outside. Just keep on circling my block. Keeping perfect time, although played with unseen hands. What is more astounding is the reports that all stated that the instruments did not remain stationary, but would circle the room, playing wildly as they danced above the heads of the spectators. During one seance, Dr. G. Swan of Cincinnati wrote later of a flying tambourine. One minute I would feel it on my head, brushing my hair, and the next moment it would be on the other side of the room. The triangle was also carried about the room and played in the same manner. Another witness, John Gage of Illinois, reported that the triangle dashed about over the heads of the visitors and was occasionally thrust in my face, so that I was afraid that I would be hit. On one of those flights, the triangle dropped onto the wife's lap and then smacked him up the side of the head. Both agreed that it weighed close to 20 pounds. This is insane. And the truck's back again. So floating instruments, that's interesting to me. Like, how did they pull that off? Because we all know that the Fox sisters, they were kind of phonies, right? Like, those seances back then were something else. Like, we all try to do seances now, and we get some lights lighting up on a REM pod or something. It's so crazy how the spirituality movement back in the 1800s was. So, the Coons family. I'm going to put the link in this story so you guys can finish it. But the Coons apparently gave up their medium performances and moved to Illinois. In an obituary for Neham Coons, which was discovered by Sherry Pierce and passed on to this forum, learned that he died in 1921 at the age of 84 in Franklin County, Illinois. He and his family had accompanied his father to Franklin County, where they lived for about 10 years before moving to Perry County. Neham then moved to Perry County, Missouri until 1880, when he again returned to Illinois. Okay, so it seems like they moved out. I mean, it is almost automatic for us to say that the whole thing must have been a hoax. But then how do we explain the independent accounts of such strange happenings, like the other people that were from different states? Even if all reports were made by avowed spiritualists who visited the spirit room only to confirm their beliefs, the general agreement of the separate accounts seemed to offer evidence pointing towards the fact that the Coons were not putting on fraudulent performances. What could they have done to gain from it? Only notoriety it was not money that they exchanged for, as they did not charge for their seances. And if it was fame that they were seeking, then why vanish without a trace after only 6 years as mediums? Like, what really happened to the Coons family after they left Athens County? It's very strange. There's one report. He lived in Oklahoma and Arkansas for a time after the death of his wife in 1899. We're talking about the son. He remained a spiritualist throughout his life, which was described by those who knew him as exemplary. He passed in his sleep on October 26th, leaving no clue as to why he abandoned what was apparently an amazing career as a medium. Maybe they got scared. Maybe the ghost scared them. Who knows? Who knows? But they're saying that how much and how intense their seances were and how often they did it, it opened some kind of portal in Athens. That's the theory. Excuse me. All right, so I have a story for you guys that is user submitted, and it's about Athens, which is what made me even want to do this episode like this month. Okay. So this is from Sam. That's all it says, from Sam. I used to visit Athens as a kid and a young adult because my dad was born there and raised on the plains. And I would visit my grandmother on the plains. But head into Athens every chance I got to escape the boredom of the country because I was a city kid. I remember in the early 90s, my sister and I had met a townie named Jay. We'll call him Jay, who was a little bit older than us and lived in an old house near the Ohio University campus. We had convinced our family to let us spend the night at his house in town because we were so bored. After spending the day with Jay and meeting a number of his friends, he had to leave the house to run an errand and told us he would be back shortly. My sister was tired and decided to take a nap upstairs, but I was wide awake and decided to explore the house a little. I'm from a major city in the West, where houses and buildings were relatively new, so I was so fascinated with the old house I was in. As I was walking on the main level, there was a room off to the main hall to the left with the door open and a bluish light coming from it. Curious, I headed towards the room and popped my head in. In the room, there was a family, and it looked like 3 generations. There was a teenager, an older teenager girl, and what looked like to be their parents, and then another older couple that could have been their grandparents. They were sitting silently watching an old TV, which was the source of the bluish light. There was no sound coming from the TV, and I remember thinking that the people's clothes and hairstyles were kind of dated. But I found that it wasn't necessarily strange in Ohio because Ohioans seemed to be in a different decade behind in fashion compared to the West Coast. I would say that they looked like they had an 80s or late 70s style, but none of them noticed me. They just stared straight ahead, expressionless at the TV, not saying a damn word. Knowing I was a visitor in the house and trying to be polite, I stepped into the room and introduced myself, letting them know I was a friend of Jay's and my sister and I were just staying the night. They just sat there and stared straight ahead at the TV, not even bothering to glance at me. And I thought that was strange because I was standing right next to the TV and they were facing me. But just as they sat there with expressionless faces, then I made a comment that it was a beautiful house. Still nothing. After a few minutes with my one-sided conversation and their awkward silence, I just finally said, "Well, it's nice to meet you all. Have a good night." Before leaving the room and returning upstairs to where my sister was, Jay came back about an hour later, and I told him I met your family earlier downstairs and they're really fucking weird. He looked at me funny and said that he didn't live with his family. He lived in the house with one roommate, one of the guys I had met earlier that day. This confused me, so I took him to the room where I had seen them. And the room looked completely different than it had before. There was no couch, there was no TV, and there was no family sitting there. It was pretty much empty with just a few storage items. Perplexed and not knowing what to say, I just let it go because I didn't want him to think I was fucking crazy. Wow. Yeah, that's a scary, scary thing. Well, if you guys enjoyed this month's episode about Athens and the hauntings surrounding the cemeteries and the Ohio University known as the Ridges, let me know in the comments. Rate the show, share it with a friend, and come back next month as we pay tribute to Bobby Mackey's music world that is being demolished in July. So, until next time, email me with your own spooky story. Email me with a topic that you want at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com, and stay spooky.